Hello, history lovers. Welcome to History Obscure. From the title of my channel, it's obvious I want to talk about some more obscure people in history or some more obscure facts. But that doesn't always mean talking about, just because it's obscure doesn't always mean talking about people you haven't heard of. But sometimes we've heard an incomplete story about different people from history. And I feel that's the case with the six wives of Henry VIII. And I want my first six videos to be about them. Now, there's an easy way to remember what happened to each wife.
Divorced, beheaded, and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. I'm Henry VIII, I had 6 sorry wives. Some might say I ruined their lives.
Since we're starting in order with Henry VIII's wives, that means starting with Catherine of Aragon. Now, this next clip from Horrible Histories pretty much sums up the facts that everybody knows about her, but there's so much more to her than this.
Catherine of Aragon was one. She failed to give me a son. I had to ask her for a divorce. That broke up her heart, of course.
From that, you might get the idea that Catherine's marriage to Henry was never a happy one. That's not entirely true. But before the marriage even started, they had something to overcome. Henry's father wanted Catherine to marry Henry, but the problem was Catherine had already been married to Henry's older brother, who died shortly after the wedding.
I mean, the Tudor Church doesn't even recognise in-laws as a thing, so you're actually my sister. And this is not ancient Egypt, so...
Now, there was an answer to this, and Henry wasn't at all unwilling to do this. But he did need the Pope's help to have their problem solved.
You guys weren't married that long, were you?
See, this is true.
I mean, I could ask the Pope to say that you weren't married long enough for it to count. Kind of like the 4-second rule when you drop a biscuit on the floor or a piece of salami.
Yeah.
I mean, he's bound to agree. How hard can this be?
Okay, then, brother, we shall be married.
Maybe drop the whole brother thing there, yeah?
Will do.
Now, I don't think that Henry and Catherine, whose original name was Catalina in Spanish, she was in fact the daughter of the Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella, the same Ferdinand and Isabella, by the way, who funded Columbus's voyage to America. But anyway, back on track. I don't believe that they saw each other as brother and sister. That's just to show how they're getting married was going to be a problem at first. But they did seem to honestly love each other. There are people who said at the time that Henry was extremely fond of Catherine, even when she was married to his brother. He was just a kid at the time of the marriage. He was only 10, but he still liked her. Now keep in mind, poor Catherine had been unable to basically do anything with her life from the time that she was widowed until Henry grew up enough for her to marry. And it wasn't even certain that she would be married to Henry. In fact, Henry VIII's father, Henry VII, had expressed thoughts of marrying her himself, which would obviously not have been a love match. But Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon got along very well. He even made the comment that if he were free to choose a wife all over again, he would still choose her. But the Tudor dynasty, or dynasty as the British would pronounce it, wasn't very well established. It had begun when Henry VIII's father had defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth. So obviously, they need to make sure that monarchy, that their dynasty is going to last. Henry needs an heir, and a girl heir isn't going to do it. But actually, something that I was never taught in history class that I actually learned later, Catherine actually did give Henry a son.
Was completed when on New Year's Day, 1511, his new wife bore him a seemingly healthy son to be called Henry.
Tragically, little baby Henry did not live long. They lost him only weeks later, and it was just a crushing blow. And this was not the first time that Catherine had miscarried. A couple of years before that, she actually miscarried a little baby girl. And to make that loss even more painful, she'd been told it's okay, losing this girl was a blow, yes, but the baby girl is one of twins. In another 3 months, because this baby was only 6 months along, in another 3 months, you'll give birth to another healthy baby. That didn't happen. That was the doctors at the time not knowing basically anything medically. So she had to go through the heartbreak of first losing a baby, then being told she was still pregnant when having another baby that never happened. Now she's lost the son that they'd both been hoping for so much. But life had to go on, and part of royal life continuing was war. And while Henry was away at war, he had to leave somebody in charge.
France between June and October of 1513, it was Catherine he put in charge of England's affairs. He made her governor of the realm and captain general, giving her the authority to raise troops, make appointments, and had a council to do business with. This shows that Henry certainly trusted Catherine, not only on a marital level, but with his kingdom.
I was very surprised to learn that Henry gave Catherine that much authority. Not because of Catherine herself, but because we know how Henry viewed women. He hated the thought of having a daughter succeed him. It had simply never been done to have a queen rule instead of a king. So I was very surprised that he put that much trust in Catherine, and that says a lot about Catherine herself, that she was able to win over the trust of someone like Henry. And she did indeed prove very, very capable of leading England in his absence, and she was quite the warrior herself.
Perfect opportunity to strike, James IV of Scotland invaded on the 22nd of August. On the 3rd of September, Catherine instructed Sir Thomas Lovell to raise an army in the Midlands, and by the 8th of September, Catherine herself rode north with a reserve army despite being pregnant. On the 9th, Thomas Howard, Earl of Surrey, who was in charge of the Northern Army, defeated the Scots at Flodden. James IV died on the battlefield with many of his men, and Catherine sent a piece of his bloodied coat to Henry.
Catherine went above and beyond anything Henry could ever have asked of a queen. But sadly, her being such a warrior might have caused even another tragedy. And this was the one that maybe finally broke the marriage.
Possibly because of her endeavours, Catherine once again miscarried a son on the 13th of September. A painful and sad pattern was to follow. The following year, in November or December 1514, Catherine lost yet another child, a son who was stillborn. Henry's dalliances with other women continued and only grew with each lost child.
Henry was a notorious womanizer already, something that would continue through all of his marriage. Someone in charge who cheated on every single wife he had. Can I think of anyone like that today? Nah, people like that don't exist anymore, right? Anyway, Catherine suffered through all of this, and even when Henry got a woman pregnant with a son who would be named Henry Fitzroy, Henry, son of the king, she didn't say a word about it. But there was a silver lining to the cloud of sorrow that was hanging over Catherine right now. She became pregnant one more time.
Although Catherine must have felt trepidation at getting her hopes up. But she carried to term and gave birth to a healthy daughter named Mary on the 18th of February 1516, a girl who would grow up to become England's first crowned Queen Regnant. Catherine's joy at finally being a mother to a living child was unbounded, and through
This little girl would grow up to be the future Mary the First, known to history as Bloody Mary, and I definitely want to talk more about her in a future video, but as I've said, a girl was not good enough for Henry. He was already looking at other, you know, he was already looking at women long before Mary was born. Well, now he was getting serious with Anne Boleyn. And, of course, she's up next in the line of Henry's wives. Anne held out, saying, "I'm not going to be your mistress. I'm going to be your queen, or you're not having me at all." Can't blame her. She didn't want to be the third woman. And Anne herself is a very fascinating character who gets painted in a lot of different ways. And I'm going to examine that in my next video. But of course, Henry wants to be with Anne, can't be with her while he's married. He needs an annulment, not a divorce. Divorce, as we know it, did not exist at that time. What he needs is an annulment. Which, for those of you not raised Catholic, who aren't someone who isn't familiar with the term, an annulment basically means the Pope saying, "You guys were never married in the first place. It was never a valid marriage." Well, how is Henry going to say that there wasn't a valid marriage? That all comes down to her being married to his brother Arthur. And the question of, did they ever actually consummate the marriage? Well, they'd already gotten a dispensation from the Pope saying that they had not consummated the marriage, so she was free to marry Henry. Well, now that whole question is coming up again, and people bring up things that Arthur had supposedly said after their wedding night.
Arthur's various gentlemen attendants would state that he had joked the following morning about being in the mist of Spain, and that it was a good pastime to have a wife. These remarks would seem to settle the matter of whether or not the marriage was consummated, except that Arthur was unlikely to have admitted defeat, and these remarks were not repeated until many years later. Catherine was silent on the matter as expected of a princess, but unlike so many royal weddings before, including that of her own parents, there was no display of blood-soaked sheets the following morning.
The idea of sheets sounds gross, but at the time it was used to verify, yes, they'd consummated the marriage, here's the proof virginity was taken. The fact that it wasn't done in this case might indicate that the marriage was never consummated, as Catherine always maintained. Yes, Arthur made those remarks, but he's a 15-year-old kid, and he's supposed to get his wife pregnant to ensure the next generation. Is he gonna come out and say nothing happened on the wedding night? And did Arthur even say that? These are his friends talking years later when Henry asked them to speak about it when it became a legal matter. Well, Catherine has some powerful friends. Her nephew is the Holy Roman Emperor, and he's going to be able to help her with this. At least enough to make sure that there isn't going to be any annulment granted.
She immediately wrote to her nephew Charles, asking him to personally try and dissuade Henry from this course of action and to force the Pope to summon the case to Rome.
To put it mildly, there was never going to be any annulment. So, Henry came up with his own solution. I mean, after all, according to the Bible and Leviticus, a man shouldn't lay with his husband's wife. Of course, the Bible also says that a man is supposed to marry his sister's widow. Henry conveniently ignored that. Cherry picking the Bible, said, yeah, I accept this part that says my marriage to Catherine was cursed. And you know what? I'm pretty scholarly. I'm a religious guy. I'm just going to start my own church and call it the Church of England. Grant myself the divorce. Life is good. I can marry Anne Boleyn now. Everything's perfect. Yeah. Except for the way he treated Catherine. I could not believe it when I heard what he wanted her to do, even after it was clear that their marriage was over.
In June 1530, Henry was still asking Catherine to make his shirts. But finally, in 1531, Catherine was banished from court and Anne was given her rooms. On the 11th of July 1531, it was the last time Catherine and Henry ever saw each other. She was ordered to the Moor Castle in Hertfordshire, while Mary was to remain at Windsor, and Catherine would also never see her daughter again.
That's something I find especially tragic, that Catherine and Mary were never able to see each other again. The best they could do was have notes smuggled between them. Even when Mary was very ill, Catherine wasn't allowed to attend to her. And Catherine herself did not have long to live by this point.
By the 6th of January 1536, she was severely unwell, and she wrote to Charles V to ask him to protect Mary for her. She heard Mass and apparently wrote one last letter to Henry, professing her love to him, even after everything he had put her through. A cynic might wonder if Catherine hoped it would hurt him in her absence. The following afternoon, on the 7th of January, the rightful Queen of England died.
When an autopsy was performed on Catherine, it was learned that her heart had turned completely black, even though everything else about her was normal. Now, this could very easily have been a sign of cancer of the heart, or some people at the time thought that she had been poisoned. I don't know for sure which is true. I'm not an expert on poisons, and I couldn't find anything about any type of poison that would turn the heart black like that while leaving everything else normal. Cancer is the most likely cause of her death, but people at the time certainly talked and blamed Henry. Nothing was ever done about it, of course, because he was the king. When Catherine died, Henry and Anne Boleyn both wore yellow, which in England at the time was a color of celebration, although they claimed they wore it because it was a color of mourning in Catherine's native Spain. Yeah, I'll let you decide whether you believe that they were in mourning or celebrating. Now, Catherine was given a burial with very little ceremony, only befitting the wife of the former Prince of Wales, with her being Arthur's wife. No acknowledgement that she was ever Henry's real wife, and Mary, her daughter, was declared illegitimate. This was a hard blow, although, of course, we know how things turned out for Anne Boleyn, and I don't blame Anne at all for what happened to Catherine. I'm going to talk a lot more about that in my next episode. Anne had a pretty tragic life herself. Obviously, we all know how it turned out. But if there's one thing I want my viewers to take away from this video, it's that there's a lot more to the lives of these 6 women than we think about just learning about them through the perspective of being Henry VIII's wives. We can't separate them from that aspect of history, but these were human beings, and they deserve to be remembered in a very human way. And I hope to see you in my next video, and I hope you enjoyed this. Keep watching for more videos from History Obscure.